Right. Thank you. Welcome everyone to the March 30th, 2022 CRU Task Force. I'll take the roll. Al Nickerson.
Here.
Bill Norris. Bill Sutton.
He's on, I see Pat's online. I would
Oh,
assume,
okay.
I would assume he's online.
Oh, Bill Sutton. Brian Greenwood.
Here.
Buck Nickerson is not with us tonight. Cindy Genther.
Cindy's here.
Jim Saunders. Jim's not with us tonight. Kim Cole.
Here.
Pat Langenfelder.
Here.
Paul Ruge. Ray Strong.
Here.
Sam Shogay.
I'm here.
Tom Mason. Tyler Brown. Tyler. Thank you all. The first item of agenda is approval of the summary of the December 8th, 2021 meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review it? And if there are any questions, comments, if not, I'll entertain a motion to accept those minutes. I have a motion. Okay. And a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? You can raise your hand. I'm not going to roll. Any opposed? All right, we'll take the minutes, be accepted to that. Took a few months off, but remember that the ground rules here: share ideas openly and freely. There's no right or wrong inputs for discussion purposes. Please speak through the chair, raise your hand, and if you're online, I'll call for that at that time. Do not interrupt people. Please do not talk and debate amongst yourselves. Respect others' views. Keep your contributions short to the point. And if you're online, take your mute on when you're called on. Under old business, we had the ZoneCo presentation of text changes related to the diagnostic report. Bill, is anyone we're gonna offer anything or just offer what the task force has? Okay, is there anyone on the task force that has any comments or questions for the old business we had at the December meeting? Is there anyone online that has any questions or comments? Hearing none, we'll move forward. Part of that discussion was the discussion of task force schedule, which I think we'll get into later today. So unless there's any comments about that, we'll move on from there. Hearing none, let's move to new business, which in your report is the proposed graphic changes for the to be incorporated into the land use ordinance. And Bill, you're going to handle that. Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you.
As part of our work with the land use ordinance, the consultant team at ZoneCo and Hardesty in Hanover proposed including certain illustrative graphics for zoning chapters to make the land use ordinance more accessible to users. I think we had a sample of a residential and commercial early on, which was well received. These graphics tonight include a character diagram and a regulation diagram. And the character diagram shows an example of how development could appear simply as an illustrative model on a sample parcel. And the regulation diagram does more of laying out simple setbacks on a standard size lot for the zoning district. And the goal of these diagrams is to communicate the basic approach for the zoning districts in order to aid understanding. And the attachments are provided for review and comment before proceeding to a final version. There's some issues with this. This is, as I said, it's a draft, and staff has talked a little bit with the consultants about the fact that front and rear yard setbacks are reversed on waterfront properties. So we probably need a way to discuss that graphically. So if you have a waterfront property, you can see the different ways the setbacks apply to your property versus a non-waterfront property for those districts that have waterfront. For me also, I thought it was interesting to see how the code works. This really does give an idea and a visual of sort of what the, I guess, the minimum lot size is and what the setbacks create on the lot. Some of the things that aren't included yet is landscaping for buffers and parking lots are not included. This is, I think there's street trees included and areas for the buffer planting. And the focus is on the developed portion of the different districts. So for example, the AZD district doesn't really give you an illustration beyond residential lots that might occur. So there isn't a, idealized farm or those kind of things. So I think it's interesting because, the way most zoning codes work, it's a very sort of suburban approach, creating lots and setbacks and houses that are, centered a certain distance from streets, et cetera. And that really sort of shows through when you turn the words into pictures. So tonight, the staff is just requesting your review and comments that we can communicate back to the consultant if there's issues. And eventually these would be included as a front piece in front of zoning chapters. Again, the idea is to give people a quick overview of sort of how things might look and also a sort of a layout of how things might sit on a lot. So
Thank you.
thank you, sir.
Appreciate it. To the task force here, any comments or questions about what you have in front of you and thoughts that we can forward back to staff here to the consultants? Bill, the only thing I guess, and that you
Yes, sir.
may have just rephrased that properly, this would be like a preface to the verbal
Yes, sir.
in every section. Okay.
Yes.
Or the written, excuse me.
And practically speaking, it would certainly be in the very beginning of the chapter. It might be next to the dimensional standards, right? So that it's easy to see how the chart translates into a picture. It might be item 2 or 3, maybe. Because usually there's the purpose statement, and then there's going to be some graphics and charts to present uses in a new way. We talked about that. And then the graphics to illustrate how dimensional standards work.
Very good. Any other comments here? Oh, go ahead.
Looking at here, when you have a regulatory diagram, say, when you're using some figures and some distances, is that what's in the plan now?
Right.
In the zoning plan now?
Right. What's being applied is minimum setbacks are being applied to show where the edges
some
are.
of those might change, or
Some of those
So
might change if you all
this is not
wish it.
etched in stone.
No, sir.
And so.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone out in the audience have a comment or question for staff or?
Hey there, I just have a question.
Can I give you the mic?
I'm just wondering the difference between the character diagram and the regulatory diagram. I didn't quite understand. I mean, I can see it when I look at it, but when you look at the regulatory diagram, it's only about the setbacks. I guess I don't understand why the lot widths, what these dimensions are.
So some of the districts have a minimum lot width and a minimum area. So that means that if you apply the minimum lot width, then you have a depth.
So that's what this is. This is all minimums. Okay. I get it now. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone on the stream or those task force members have any comments or questions about what's been presented?
Hi, Joe. This is Kim.
Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to, I really appreciate the diagrams. I think they make it much clearer. I think it'll be easier for the reader. So I think they're well done.
Good comment. Go ahead, Paul.
Question to Bill. The character diagrams, you're showing trees off the property up here. The only reason I'm bringing that up is Fisher here, and whatever his times have brought up maintaining road buffer. What you're doing is you're giving the impression here that any street trees or any kind of boundary definition you're doing out in, you might say, the county right of way versus on our property.
That's true.
you know, it's just the impression you're getting. This person out here that, you know, was concerned about, you know, what the character diagram, you know, what it portrays.
Mhm.
It's actually portraying.
Right.
Out, you might say, on the county right away.
That's a good point.
Next thing that'll happen is the county will be out there trying to take them down. Criminal. That's just one thing. And the other question I got is, I still would like to have enclave explained to me
Okay. We can do that.
at some point. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be now. I just see it diagram. We go through it.
I mean, I know, I mean, we can give a really, really brief explanation. An enclave is specifically, and Carla, hop in because you know way more about this than I do. It's a very limited development. It has to be located far from the edges of the farm. It kind of creates a small area with small lots that are in the center of the farm that creates this little district while preserving sort of all of the views and the forest and the edges so that it's not at the edge of the road, it's in the center of the farm. And there's a little different density for that within that area. There's a lot of standards and restrictions to make sure that that's sort of away from everything else.
It's basically a cluster subdivision.
It would be a cluster, but you're saying within the farm, because then it runs into the size of the lots versus what the health department wants for a reserve for septic and everything else.
Well,
Well,
lots
the
of
zoning
three-quarter of
doesn't
an
care
acre.
about that. That's,
Yeah.
if it
Sorry.
doesn't meet the health departments, it doesn't matter what you do there.
It's just setting everybody up, you might say, to argue or something. It should be, somehow it should be worked together on.
Well, the size of the lot was set to accommodate most standard septic systems. And it's similar in size to many of the other.
Yeah, it might handle the septic system, but it doesn't handle the reserve.
It does.
It does.
You can fit a 10,000 square foot septic reserve area in a house.
That's a quarter of an acre.
On 3/4 of an acre. That's the maximum lot size.
The density's 1 to 10.
Right.
Instead of 1 to 30
Right.
in the ag district. So in essence, it allows you to get quite a
More
more,
houses, you can get more.
a bunch more houses, and it also requires you to be out in the middle of wherever it is you're going, 600 feet from the road, 600 from any preserved land. So anyway,
How many are there in the county? I mean, unfortunately,
probably your best examples out of
Yeah.
Buckingham, Preston Lane.
I think there's one other.
Yeah, they say there aren't many.
just curious.
Well, I don't think there's many of them
There are, and then
utilized because it goes right out into the middle of a field, which makes it difficult for farming around it. And generally speaking, it'll use up the very finest quality farmland you have because that's where you find your best percolation for the most part. However, there are some other quality soil types of soil types that perk well, that don't grow very well. So, you know, that's the issue with it.
No, I'm just curious. You say they're trying to picture.
It's my understanding there's very few.
Preston Lane is the best example.
Thank you.
Anything else? Questions out there? Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, sir.
That went pretty rapidly. I guess we'll move on to, instead of taking a break, we'll move into the topic of consolidation of limited zoning districts. That's you? Thank you, Carl.
The idea of consolidating zoning districts came up early on and didn't get a lot of discussion, but I know there was a little bit of concern and about doing it. And the more we've kind of continued to think about the land use ordinance and how to make it easier for people to understand, or to, even maybe to reduce the size so it doesn't seem so overwhelming. We felt that we should revisit this topic, that there were a couple of zoning districts that paired up well together and should be further explored for consolidation. So the first one is the community residential and the rural residential districts. What we did is you had sort of a cover memo that talked a little bit about either the history or the amount of acreage in certain districts, whether some of the similarities or differences, and then there were 3 sets of compared Word documents. So what we did is we used Microsoft Word's algorithms to smush the 2 selected districts together and to see where the similarities and differences were. And so in all of them, there's a note at the top that indicates any of the plain text in black is identical in both districts. And then underlined text is only in one district and strike through text is only in the other district. As far as the community residential and rural residential districts go, the community residential district was a district that came out of the 2002 rezoning. So there was a rural residential district in 1989. In 2002, that district was kind of split, reconfigured a little bit. And really the biggest difference between those 2 districts is that the rural residential district has a density of 1 dwelling unit per 3 acres, was sort of meant to accommodate kind of that larger lot suburban subdivision feel. It is located, a lot of it is located in areas such as Cooper's Lane, Kennard's Point, where those kinds of lots and development already existed. And the community residential district has a density of 1 dwelling unit per acre and is located more around areas closer to towns and villages or areas such as Kentmore Park that had smaller lots already to begin with. The idea of combining these 2 districts would be that everything becomes the community residential, so there would be an upzoning in the rural residential, currently rural residential zoned areas, but we don't really feel that it is a significant increase in the number of lots that would be permitted in the county. And I gave you some information on sort of the number of acres of each of those districts in 1989 and now, and I can answer any questions about that. I really think that of the 3 pairs of districts we're going to discuss tonight, these are the 2 that are the most similar. As you can see, if you look through, there are a couple of uses that would need discussion. For instance, rural residential allows public stables. Community residential does not right now, so we'd need to make some choices on things like that. And I'm not aware of any public stables that currently exist in the rural residential, so we wouldn't be making anything non-conforming. And there are a couple of other uses that probably fit better on your larger, more suburban lots than maybe on your kind of smaller, more villagey type lots or edge of village. I'm going to call it edge of village because village is actually more intense than community residential. So I don't know if you have any questions, if you want me to go through, if we'll do them individually.
As far as this, yeah, I'd go ahead and let's get this. We'll get, I think, just get those questions and move on so we don't bounce back and forth.
Yep, I would agree.
Okay.
So any kind of thoughts, concerns, questions on the idea of combining community residential and rural residential and only having a community residential district?
Would the density be in that?
Your density would be 1 dwelling unit per acre.
You are upzoning.
You are upzoning, I guess about 2,300 acres.
That's new acres or just using the
That is,
residential precinct ad?
that is based on current mapping. So obviously, when we go through that whole mapping exercise, that would be the next step.
Carly, do you see any problem with and I'll pick on, I know like Kennard's Point is probably protected, but on the edges of those, some of those large lots where now you could subdivide, someone has a 3-acre lot, and if they get a perk, they could probably get another lot in current existing areas. And don't see any problem there. And change of character in neighborhood, I guess I'm not talking about the
Yeah, I
empty lots, but the ones
Right.
that are already built on, someone could subdivide if they could get a perk maybe.
I'm not as concerned about that because many of those subdivisions have deed restrictions
Well, that's-
that limit further subdivision. So they'd have to go through and as a community decide that they want to do that. If you look at the zoning map, and that's what we forgot to bring down with us. Kennard's Point is a good example, Cooper's Lane. It's already a pretty good mix of, there is community residential right out towards, what is that, 298?
Mhm.
No, that's not 298. Still Pond Neck Road
Oh, on that side,
on
yeah,
that side.
yeah.
So kind of where laps are.
Mhm.
There's already some community residential mixed in there with some of the rural residential. It really is, it's got critical area residential, it's got rural character. If you want to talk about one of the necks in the county that has the widest span of zoning densities, that's probably the one.
Mhm.
But I mean, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think that, and like I said, I think that the deed restrictions and sort of our sort of more formal subdivisions would protect the character of those neighborhoods, unless the neighborhood decides to change. And the other thing that we took into consideration in proposing this is that while we have these densities of the one dwelling unit per acre, or even the one dwelling unit per 3 acres, it's rare that those densities are actually realized. Once you start looking at the open space requirements and roadways and stormwater management, a lot of land kind of gets taken up with that, and you really don't end up with the density that's permitted to
Right.
begin with. Thank you. So we do have a little zoning map if anybody is curious and wants to see it. So again, I think that's the other thing that there's a big difference between permitted density and realized density, particularly for large parcels. Now you're right, we do have the random 2-acre lot that wants to be split in half. And that's still going to exist
Mhm. Okay.
anywhere.
No, I thought, like, when I thought of, Kennard's Point, they're protected, but just that fringe area, which you just mentioned, so, but just a question.
That's a good question.
Anyone else have anything on this, and then on the way it's presented here? Any other?
Joe, I have a question. So
Sam?
if we go ahead and merge these two districts and we go down to one residential unit per acre, that essentially gets us to a subdivision, correct? Or is there a cap or a ceiling on how many lots fall under this particular combined land use?
I'm not entirely sure I understand your question. I mean, there wouldn't be a cap on the total number of lots that could be subdivided within the land in this district. It's going to be what you can subdivide is based on what your parent parcel, how large that is.
Right.
And
So
if you,
go ahead.
I was going to say, I think under current zoning, there was, 6,500 acres that falls into these two zoning districts. So if you could put a lot on every single one of those acres, which you can't, because you've got woods, you've got streams, you've got slopes. So there really is no way to determine what the maximum number of lots might come out of a zoning district. Because there are just too many factors that influence the design of a
Right.
subdivision.
I guess what I'm trying to ask and essentially drill down to, especially referencing the neighborhoods that we were talking about, like um, Cooper's Lane and Kinnared's Point. Those are really interesting neighborhoods that if we lower the overall or rather increase the density going from one house every 3 acres down to one house every acre, we essentially wouldn't be able to kind of recreate those neighborhoods. And I think there's a lot of value in them. Those real estate values tend to be at a premium. So I guess I'm posing this to the rest of the task force, if we're okay with essentially preventing the creation of neighborhoods like that in the future, or is one residential dwelling per acre the minimum? I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly.
That is the minimum. Well, I guess that's the maximum density. It's the maximum density, but it's not related to lot size. So
That'll tell. Not get the rest of it.
So there was a question related to, under current regulations, what percentage of a property has to be an open space? And right now it is major subdivisions shall include 40% of the adjusted tract acreage in open space. And there are a couple, ways to look at that. But so there is a significant amount of open space that is required. And I don't think just because you've got an allowable density doesn't mean that that's what somebody will come in and develop at.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, did you have a question?
To your open space. You look at it, let's say it was a 10-acre lot or a 10-acre parcel that you subdivided. 40% is going to be open space, but with the 10-acre lot, you're allowed 10 units, and you could still put 10 units in with 40% being
Yes,
open space.
if you
So
can,
therefore, the lots would be smaller than if you divided it 1 acre per lot.
if you can meet the minimum lot sizes and,
Right.
you've got to deal with perks and water and sewer and et cetera.
Okay.
One of the things about character, I know where they have covenants and restrictions that probably wouldn't apply, but the ones that don't, right now, a lot of those large lots, the house is properly situated, probably in the best spot. But this would give the opportunity with a subdivision to put guest cottages on, which is I'm not saying that's a negative thing, it's popular probably. But you could subdivide your lot and build a smaller house, effectively use it as a family compound type thing. So, yeah, that was
Potentially.
my meant of character. You're changing those things, those large lots, one house, and then you could put a smaller house that you now couldn't, but you could if you could subdivide it and create that product.
Don't know too many subdivisions that don't have covenants that say.
Yeah, it's just, some of those are like out of the Cooper's Lane area, and it'd be a few. I just meant the character, what's there. But yeah, those,
It's already primarily protected. Most of them.
but I didn't say it was a bad thing. I'm not so sure that, but I just meant what is, do we
I think
character?
that we can't, it's not a good idea to take a Kennard Point that might have a 2-acre lot, and over here, the house is on 1 acre of it and subdivide off the other acre. I don't think that's,
Well, it wouldn't happen there.
yeah, but but if you're gonna put a guest house on something, I don't think that's gonna get too much into subdivision. Why would you put a guest house make a separate lot for your guest house?
Well, if you couldn't have another residence on the lot.
Yeah, you can,
It'd be the people who wanted to have the family compounds of 3 or 4 houses that they can't do now. They could
Yeah, and I'm not, maybe a good thing to let happen some places. All right, just a question on character of neighborhoods, that's all. Does anyone else online have any questions? I haven't seen any. In the audience? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I don't know if I'm in the right place here, but about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, I'm Jim Smith, Quaker Neck. I put in, the county had a thing on if you wanted to come in and have the rezoning done on your acreage to put a form in. I put the form in, there's 4, 5, 6 pieces that were down in Quaker Neck that I wanted in agriculture to stay in agriculture. And right now they're residential.
I think they're rural character.
Rural character, okay, which means one residence on each property. And so I wanted to have it all ag. So I got an ag number from the soil conservation for my whole woods. It's all woods. And I've never heard another word about it. And so, but what I'm concerned about is I'm the other way. I don't want development on mine. My largest part of my acreage is set in a nature trail, which falls into the guidelines of being exempt from residential. It would be considered as a forest or ag business. And this nature trail is open to the public basically 8 months of the year. So it definitely falls away from what you all are talking about. But I'm concerned that if this goes through, now all of a sudden mine's going to fall into this thing where it's a higher tax base and everything, which is exactly opposite of what I want it to be for the rest of my life. So I'm concerned that this blanket coverage of these hand-drawn things, to me, got a little vague, but I'm concerned that you're going to take my property and throw it into a higher tax base and everything just because you want to get development of 1 acre here and 3 acres here or whatever. I'm totally against that.
I understand.
So, but I'm concerned that one, we've got no movement from this group that was supposed to look at our applications. And I don't know if this is a group that looks at it. I have no idea, but it kind of upsets me that all of a sudden here we're looking at how to make 1 acre highly developable, and we haven't even addressed the problem that was presented 2 years ago, So I've got a real concern about just blanket changing things.
Just so one, and I'll let Carl or Bill answer. Your use and your zoning are 2 different things for your property. Now, what happens to your neighbors is that may be of concern if you want, if it's.
Well, all my neighbors, I think, are going to be ag anyhow.
And you can, if you got your forest, conservation plan, you can retain it.
Well, see, I don't have a forest conservation plan. That's the thing. I don't need that.
Okay.
I have an ag number for the woods, which constitutes that. But here's the other thing. 20 years ago, the tax assessments were, 1 acre, the first acre of your one piece would be residential, and they tax you $200,000 for that. This is what they did. And I appealed it, took it all the way to the court in Annapolis, and I won. But did my taxes get changed? Did my thing get changed? No. That's why I brought it, when they brought it back 2 years ago, saying we can make an adjustment. I put that in, and like I say, everything stalls. I don't know why certain things stall and don't go anywhere. I guess maybe it doesn't mean anything to some of the county people. I don't really know, but to me, it means something, it means a lot.
I think that from my experience, you would need to go talk to the assessment on this.
I have, I've got,
Right, but as for map changes, we haven't started that process yet. So
well, that's what I'm talking about. That 2
Right.
years ago, I put this in.
And it is on file and we have it.
Okay.
And,
I'm just
and
concerned.
so we've been dealing with text changes. And then we're dealing with this consolidation of districts under text changes because it would affect the text and how it's written and whether we revise any of the uses and the number of districts that we end up with. But then there will be a whole separate process to review all of the maps.
Yeah. Well, I just don't want to get, run over and all of a sudden I get a new tax bill that I got.
It's not going to get run over.
All right. Thanks.
Don't go back here if you do. We don't, I can't help you.
All right.
No, and
There you go.
And I think that your properties are rural character. So
Yeah, I
this,
think that's what
and it's-
all of were,
yeah.
all ag is what.
and so that's not even a district we're talking about tonight. So
Thank you, appreciate it. All right.
In the back,
I have just a couple of questions for clarification purposes.
can you state your name for the tape, please? Sorry.
Paula Reeder, Still Pond. Carla, what is the current house per acre criteria for rural versus community residential?
rural residential has a density of 1 dwelling unit per 3 acres, and community residential has a density of 1 dwelling unit per acre.
Okay, if you consolidate these two districts, what do you propose to have happen to the permitted uses that are only in the rural residential districts?
That is a discussion that the task force would need to have.
Okay, so the person who owns a 3-acre parcel is currently permitted to do a whole bunch of things, including having large livestock and kennels and other things, is going to be subject and open to debate if this happens. Is that correct? There are no guarantees.
Correct, but I am not aware of, other than potentially livestock, which we're addressing through other changes, use changes. I'm not aware of any properties in rural residential that have a public stable, have an aquaculture facility, have a commercial dog kennel, have more than 4 horses or mules on less than 20 acres, or sand and gravel pits.
I don't know of any sand or gravel pits either, but I think there could be instances where other uses are
And so
in
the
place.
task force can say, you know what, commercial dog kennels could be in community residential.
Okay. But right now, there could be people out there
There could
who are,
be, but
who are
that is
affected by
going to
this.
be the case no matter what we do.
I
We are
understand.
making changes that are probably going to affect somebody in some way, whether we change their zoning or not.
Okay, it's just my opinion that the task force needs to be aware of
Great.
that.
Yep.
How does this, I'm not saying consolidation is a bad idea. I think fewer the better, frankly, but I'm wondering, in the context of other discussions that this group has had, how this consolidation, if it goes forward, what implications it has for the 10% rule for the ag property and what's permitted there versus not permitted.
It has nothing to do with the agricultural zoning district.
I understand that. I'm just saying for practical application purposes, and what's permitted for county residents if this consolidation occurs that isn't permitted now goes forward. I'm just saying this doesn't
I'm not sure
sit
that I'm
right.
following your concern.
Well, we had a big discussion about getting rid of the 10% rule and that's been a matter of continuing debate. And that rule just permits people to subdivide their land for purposes that are meaningful for the owner in a way that, let me back up. This would result, if this is approved, it would result in a wholesale opportunity for anyone who has a 3-acre or larger property that's zoned rural residential to subdivide their property, assuming all the conditions are met, into 1-acre lots, correct? So I could have my 6-acre property, and assuming I got perks, I could take my 6-acre property and divide it into 6-acre lots, 1-acre lots at will. Is that correct?
For any land that would fall under whatever this zoning district is.
Right. So all of a sudden I have a whole bunch more latitude by this consolidation than I ever had or ever would have otherwise. Whereas if I'm an ag owner, I'm restricted to 10% of my land if I own less than 100 acres. Somehow the logic doesn't make sense.
So I think that what you're talking about is two different zoning types.
I understand. I'm just saying, how are people treated in the process? You're right.
So in essence, what if you have land that is zoned agricultural,
Mhm.
then they want to have more options, then depending on where it's located and what the conditions of that land are, they better darn sight pay attention when it comes time to reclassify zoning.
To remap.
Yes. And that's probably a very important point you make there.
Well, I'm just saying, I think that different landowners in this process are being given different opportunities that aren't equal. That's all I'm saying. And
But you can request your land to be zoned. She understands that.
I understand that. I understand.
That's what Billy's saying. I think that's what's important. You requested to be rezoned to rural residential. And you're not 100%.
But they might not want to do that for tax reasons.
I mean, I guess,
Oh,
yeah.
Okay,
Right.
okay.
right. And there are always going to be different zoning districts that have different densities. And honestly, I did look at the 1989 zoning versus what we did in 2002, and it was pretty surprising to see some of the areas that did change. I mean, there were areas that were zoned rural residential that got rezoned to be ag. There were areas that were commercial that got rezoned to be village. When you really kind of look at, there were about 12,000 acres that changed from one zoning district to another. And it didn't always it wasn't always that somebody got upzoned. There were people that got downzoned as well. So I think we're being a little premature to be thinking about the mapping too much.
Okay, I don't want to go into that argument. The other question I have was, if you do upzone, how does that affect property taxes? How might that affect property taxes?
It shouldn't affect property taxes.
Shouldn't affect assessments at all?
No.
No, you, size of improvements, use, quality.
Okay.
It's only on taxing, only on use, not zoning. You can have village land lands that, you just tax if you're farming and $3 an acre, same as any agricultural use around.
Well, there is, you differentiate between waterfront properties and other properties. And
But it's still, it's based on what's the land characteristic, not the zoning of it. So, yeah, it's,
okay, well, that's reassuring.
I think everyone.
When you start
Yeah,
talking.
but hold a sec. Good, let's go. Bill, do you have something on? Yeah, gentlemen,
Yes.
sorry. I'll get back to you. Mr. Hoagland, I'm sorry. We had a question back there for you, Mr. Hoagland. I'll wait until he finishes. I didn't forget about you.
I just want to add this idea to discussion. The goal here is to try to consolidate zoning districts to make things simpler. And we, kind of went around this tree before and sort of ran into the same things. And in meeting with our consultant and with our most knowledgeable member of staff, it was recommended that we really should try and get some consolidation. I think that just in general, when districts have larger lot sizes, then more intensive uses can be permitted. So in making a choice, if you're going to combine two districts, then probably you would want to, if you're going to reduce the size of the lots and increase the density, then you would probably want to jettison the more intensive uses, right? The commercial things that wouldn't normally be there. And conversely, you could retain those intensive uses and make the zoning be 1 to 3 acres for the entire new district. I mean, you can go either way with that. So the goal really is to try and consolidate districts, not to create an upzoning or a downzoning, but to somehow come up with ways to make the code simpler, easy for people to approach. In many cases, these zones, in this case, really, other than the density, the zones are extremely close to each other and previously were the same zone under the previous ordinance. So again, I think we're looking for the task force to sort of give us direction on what you would like to see, and you might not want to see combination at all. That's perfectly fine. But we're just trying to come to a way to make things simpler. So it could be downzoning with more intensive uses. I mean, either way is fine. So, okay.
Agree. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Just because we go down to one lot or 1 acre and combine these districts doesn't mean you have to develop that intensely. You can still go at the rate of what you 1 to 3. It doesn't make you do that. Am I correct, Eric?
Correct.
Okay, I think what a lot of people have overlooked and really hasn't been discussed to this point is that when the 10% rule was enacted, when 2002 or whenever that was, not only was that enacted, but we also lost the opportunity, or the opportunity was diminished to take any parcel between 4 and 60 acres and split at one time. That's never been mentioned to my knowledge. So that too was reduced, or your ability to create, split a parcel.
We need to stay on topic because we got this one. We'll get back to that, I'm sure. But the thing that was brought up about uses is in the staff report about stables, those things that exist or could be existing. That's a good question for this. But to me, I understand that density could increase here, but these are our residential areas anyway. The practical thing has been mentioned before that the densities are never be utilized completely anyway, and the health department's going to outweigh anything in this process too. Any further questions or comments? Go ahead, Pat.
I have just one quick one. Most of these areas currently zoned either rural residential or what the other one was, they're mostly around towns, aren't they? I mean, they're not out, they're usually around town.
They are around other development or
exactly.
towns. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Any recommendations for the staff? Their recommendation is that we do consolidate here with caveat we handle these uses a little better, what's allowed in that more dense, possibly more dense developed area.
And other than public stables, the other uses that don't exist are special exceptions right now anyway. So
if you made stables a special exception, that would handle that.
you could,
Just leave
or you could, and you could leave these other things as special exceptions as well, or you could decide, you know what? Sand and gravel pits just aren't appropriate in residential districts.
Maybe that would be one to eliminate.
Let's just eliminate it.
So this is Cindy Genther. I
Go ahead,
support this. I support this consolidation recommendation wholeheartedly. Moving on.
Thank you. I would concur. Good.
Just a general question. On rezoning, remapping, if a person requests whatever their zone, they want to change the zone, is that usually permitted, or is it, how does that?
In 2002, they were reviewed on a case-by-case basis. And that was a long time ago, so I don't know for certainty that they were all approved. I think some were, some weren't. I'd have to there. I know that information still exists, but so I mean, I think it was, no, I mean, it was based on sort of what the vision of the county was looking for. So, for example, and I'm making something completely off the top of my head, but say hypothetically, a farmer up in the sort of the Massey area where a lot of industrial land is, says, you know what, and it's like the farm that's right in the middle. So there'd be industrial below, to the south and to the north. Say they came to us and said, you know what, I want to be remapped as ag. You know, that might be one that we would sort of really kind of look at carefully and go, well, we appreciate you asking, you can still farm it, but maybe that doesn't fit with the vision. And ultimately, it is the county commissioner's decision. So we can make a recommendation, but ultimately, you could be in the middle of the ag district and you could want to go to, yes, and we might go, you know what, this is not, the infrastructure doesn't exist, there aren't highways, this is not an appropriate location to put industrial land. So.
As I remember, as a long time, as Carl said, but the area on Wharton was particularly changed a lot because of that time the county commissioner were upgrading that sewer system, and there's more village there than was, or it got really upzoned to village because they wanted to utilize capacity. But I remember that in one of these meetings, but I don't know the acres there.
Well, I certainly don't remember 2002, but I can say that generally these activities, it's a balance between overall goals and individual requests. This is the opportunity for anyone to come in and ask for what they want, and we have a long list of asks. And generally, they have an opportunity to tell why they're asking for that, why they want that designation. And then, so there's one-by-one properties like that, and then there's larger county initiatives that occur about, to balance out land use, to balance out demand, to do, to look at the comprehensive plan and what is it calling for and what can we do to, further that. So it's sort of a couple of things happening at once. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
To just they want to be such and such, not that they're going to change anything.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a mindset I mean, I know one man is industrial and he's asked me, I wanted to go to ag. And, for whatever reason, he's not planning to do anything industrial. Now, who knows what will happen in 7 years from now, unless somebody else owns one. But,
Yep.
A lot of that is the perception is taxes are going to drop too. So a lot of people don't
They
understand
don't understand
the whole
that.
process.
Right.
So we're not educated enough on all of it.
Is there anyone on the task force or online that has a real, Cindy made a comment, you thought it was a good process, and I don't sense a lot of problems, maybe except handling the special exceptions, but does anyone have a problem if they let the staff know we're not looking for opposing their recommendation? Go ahead, Paul.
This is just a question to the staff here. Is there any way, in looking at this, we see things written down, but is there any way of doing, let's say, this is just a stupid question, but stupid me, of maybe making it like an Excel spreadsheet of some sort where you've got all the districts in one direction and then all the exceptions, special exceptions, all the things going across so that you can see which ones look. Sometimes you can get a better picture that way of looking to see what's available in each district. And you'll see which ones really are very close together. I think you're shaking your head like you kind of know what I mean.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about. Because it's hard to do on here. And I'm not saying we can't, but if you take those districts, and there may be only one or two little things different between certain districts, where, just take like our last planning meeting where we're making a change to the village district and it became village-wide, instead of the intense village. When you start looking at that, if that's the only thing that's different, then you can combine it. It just makes it, I would say visually, it's a little easier thing to look at. If there's any way that can be done.
We have an unofficial matrix on the current zoning. We have asked the consultant to prepare what will be an official appendix to the new zoning. We don't have a a matrix that has any of the text changes that have already been under discussion. And I say that because when we get to the next pair of districts, there are already some things in the uses of those two districts that are related to the discussion that happened at the December meeting. And so they're not, it's not it's a comparison of what's already sort of being discussed with the new zoning and not necessarily a straight comparison between the existing districts. I'd be happy to share the unofficial matrix with you. You know, I think we felt that having, I know that this format is a little difficult to read, but at least you can pick out what is in one district versus what's in the other. But we'd be happy to share the matrix.
Okay, even if it's available, I mean, I can come down. But I think something, you know, at least to me, it's easier to look at a matrix like what you're talking about than here. I mean, you know, and I'm sure even, maybe even the public, because by the time you get done listing special exemptions for 2 or 3 different zoned areas, you forget which was in the first one, or, you know, maybe all the, you know, you don't realize how many are the same. When you start going through all the different boxes, there's just a lot of things that are the same.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 1 or 2 little differences. You may be able to pick something out, make certain areas better, let's put it that way. Or maybe with the elimination of one thing, you can combine the 2, but you can't tell unless you might say you have all the X's and O's in the proper spot.
Thank you. Yes, Bill, go ahead.
I think I sort of unintentionally stopped the public.
No, you brought a good point. Is there any further public input on this? Public input? I just have a sense from the task force, we don't see any major problems with it. It can be handled and how it's written up. That would be my opinion if anyone disagrees. Do we want to break now or do you want to soldier on? We're going to keep going then. Carla, Crossroads, commercial and commercial.
Okay. So these 2 districts, I'll give a little bit of the history on these districts. That previously there was only a Crossroads commercial district, and our ordinance, the current ordinance, said let's split them apart and have a district sort of outside of Millington and outside of Chestertown that would allow larger commercial uses than what is typically found in the smaller kind of Crossroads commercial areas. So some of those, like the area outside Millington was all Crossroads commercial under the old ordinance. And we said, all right, we need to have an area that might allow big box kind of retail or bigger shopping centers. And so there is a sort of a greater mix of differences, I guess, between these 2 districts. But our feeling is that in that, and that's because the Crossroads Commercial District actually has a larger variety of uses that are permitted than the commercial district. But I don't feel that that those uses are necessarily inappropriate in the commercial district. It's just they were kind of sized for different types of retail and commercial. And we still feel that property sizes and property locations are going to influence what somebody wants to build on a property. You know, just because a 60,000 square foot building might be allowed, if you only have 1 acre, you can't do it. So, or there might be uses that we want to add specific standards to so that they can only be in certain locations. And we already do that now. in terms of, in the commercial district, there are some language that says if you're along the 301 corridor, you can do this. If you're not on 301, then you can't. So there might be ways to add some language that would prohibit some of these uses that might be inappropriate in a crossroads location. And again, part of this bringing this forward is that there really isn't a lot of commercial zoned land in Kent County. And the pretty much all of the commercial zoned land right now is there at the 301, 291 interchange. It was almost evenly split between Millington and Chestertown, and most of the Chestertown commercial area got annexed into the town limits. And so that just left the Millington 301 corridor. So again, we might just say, you know, you can have certain types of uses in that location, and everywhere else you can have any of these other commercial uses. And we just sort of felt that because it's such a small district, that maybe it would be simpler to just have one commercial kind of district. And then we're not sort of having to flip back and forth to go, you know, which one is which, and help it make it easier for people.
What are a couple examples of the current crossroads right now that we know out in the, like it?
Where
Yeah,
examples of where it's located?
Yeah, up at, you know, Casey's at Still Pond Road and.
Up there where Molly's is located
Yeah.
is Crossroads Commercial. There is an area that's not actually developed as commercial property down at Route 20, and I think that's 21 on your way to
What
Ryan
else
Hall.
store was it? Coxfield. Okay.
Yep, Coxfield Road, sorry. There is Crossroads Commercial tends to be small properties that are scattered throughout the county, and I'm having a hard time finding them on that.
That's all right. That
There's-
was just
There's
an
a couple of
example.
acres
Yeah.
up there at, is that Still Pond Road and 213?
Yeah, that's
At
what I
the
was-
corner
yeah.
where like Greenscapes is. So the auto repair business up where you
Still
would turn
Pond.
at Still Pond. So it tends to be,
Thank you.
Shouldn't we consider some of these areas? I think you're a good idea to combine them, but a lot of the crossroad commercial areas that we have now in the county are non-usable. Like, if the one in Melatonin, that's a crossroads commercial?
no,
Okay, well, okay, so the one at 21 and 20, that is crossroads commercial.
Correct.
You can't do anything with it. It won't work. So what good is it to have its own commercial?
well, and I think that's in the question and discussion we're going to have when we start remapping.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot of those things that need to be addressed, whether it's commercial, whether it is residential or industrial. That we have a lot of stuff out there on our zoning ordinance that no matter what you zone it, nothing can be done with it. So it's kind of a waste.
Some of those are village, where does village and commercial separate? You understand what, village, you can do a lot of different things.
You can, and village is that more of a mix of residential, commercial, churches, schools, than just kind of your straight up standalone kind of commercial businesses. Now, the discussion you had in December and the diagnostic report does propose including more residential uses within the commercial district. And you can see that under the special exception list.
But on village, there's a lot of the purpose.
I don't know, that there's not,
They're kind of a wasteland.
But the village, like in Warden, that's all.
That's water and sewer. That's going to happen no matter how you zone something. They're going to be undevelopable lands.
think you gotta look at the park and the capacity of your sewer plants. I mean, how much capacity do you have? And I don't know, in Wharton, if somebody wanted to come in and, is there a lot?
There's a lot of capacity in Wharton.
Okay, well, or too much capacity.
There's a lot of capacity in Fairleigh. There's still, I think, a fair amount of capacity in Kennedyville.
No capacity in Chestertown, right?
Chestertown is independent of the county, and Chestertown has made it very clear they're not going to extend water and sewer beyond their boundaries. So if somebody wants to develop, it's probably going to have to be annexed if it needs to be on water and sewer.
Is there any members of the task force online or on the phone that have comments or questions? Any members of the public here have any questions or comments? Come forward and state your name.
Janet Christensen Lewis, I think I just have a couple of questions. It does seem like and you've already stated this, there's a lot of divergence between these two.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder, how do you, for instance, what could or should be developed on the 213 byway at Kennedyville is a lot different than what you could see developed, and you've already stated that, but how do you do that in zoning and not run into the same issue that you have now, which is a lot of confusion about this district and that? It doesn't seem like you save a lot if you're going to have to come back in and make a lot of, well, you can only do this here and this there. Am I missing something?
No, I think that if you put it all in one place, if there are certain uses that you only want in one location, and it can be based on, say there's something you only want developed on scenic byway, well, then you could put that in as a condition that, and so then when somebody's reading through what the uses are, then they would go, okay, this use is only allowed in this location. And like I said, we already have some of that in relation to 301 versus not 301. And I think that the task force could look through these uses if they want to further pursue a consolidation and determine if there's anything that needs to be better defined based on location, or if all of these uses would be okay anywhere if somebody has enough land.
Okay, so that would be a discussion if these were combined, if the task force went ahead and combined, those are discussions that would.
I think particularly with commercial, we would need to have some further discussion on how to blend the mix of uses, unless they just want to accept it as is.
Okay. And then every bit of land in Kent County is under some sort of zoning, whether it perks or not, correct? I mean, it's in one, I mean, the zone map doesn't have spaces where something isn't zoned. Is that correct?
That's correct for the unincorporated parts of the county. I can't speak to the towns.
No. I'm just talking about,
Yeah.
yeah. Is that true? Okay, so everything is in a zoning district, whether it can be used for that purpose or not. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience has any comments or questions? Anyone on the phone or online from the public have a question or comment for staff and the task force? Hearing none, I don't have any comments from the task force about what advice to give our planning staff.
This is Cindy. I support this consolidation.
Thank you, Cindy. Yep. We don't see any problem. Okay. All right. Thank you all. Since we got this far, Carl, we're going to move on. You're right.
Can we just get a little clarification on uses? I mean, is there anything when you read through this that stood out to you as something that we should further investigate and address, or?
Are the ones with the red line from those the ones that are not permitted?
The ones that are underlined are found in the Crossroads Commercial District. The ones that have the strike through are found only in the commercial.
I wondered why the auto service stations weren't under the Crossroads commercials. That, I think the limiting factor is going to be where we have that zone now, but
I guess what I'm asking though is.
I don't think I got it
What
backwards.
they combine.
I may have gotten that backwards. I got it backwards. Strike through text is in Crossroads
Oh.
Commercial.
good, okay.
Underline is in commercial. I apologize.
Sorry.
I knew something didn't look right.
Yeah, oh, I was going to say, that seems like what we ought to have.
And if the black text means that it's permitted in both of them.
So if they were combined.
Right. If you combine, then they would be allowed in the one commercial district,
All.
all of them.
Yes.
Nothing is being strucken. We're just trying to, so I think the best way to think about it is,
Outside.
it
I mean,
Yeah.
opens up the door.
It opens the door, yes. For example, because right now the commercial area there, and I'm going to focus on the one outside Millington because the couple of commercial lots outside Chestertown are actually developed. So right now, an automobile service station is not a permitted use in the commercial district. Retail nurseries and greenhouses, veterinary hospitals. So I think Crossroads Commercial had a better mix of uses. Commercial has the bigger uses. Larger,
And I think that's what you were
more
explaining.
intense.
What's now Crossroads Commercial, we don't want warehouses on it, but it won't support them anyway.
Exactly.
So,
But it clears everything all,
Yes.
simplifies, something what we're trying to do.
okay, sounds like we have anyone strongly.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
They're very persuasive, Carl. We can move to your third one here. Thank you.
Third one is looking at combining the industrial and employment center districts. This one has a little bit of history too, in that employment center right now is only found along 301 and was intended to encourage sort of that planned industrial office park type development, whereas the industrial district is a little more scattered through the county and is more reflective sort of standalone industrial businesses, and not so much kind of that whole sort of planned development concept. And you can see that there are some significant differences in the statement of intent between those two districts. There's a lot of red in the compared, which is one of the reasons why I gave you the individual statement of intent for each district. But they both of them speak to uses that are environmentally sound, sustainable, compatible with adjacent uses. And when you really look at what the permitted uses are in those two districts, they're very similar. And I think, the biggest difference, or one of the biggest differences, is that, for example, contractors' yards, manufacture, processing, and distribution of hot mix asphalt is not permitted in employment center. It is permitted in industrial, whereas offices, sort of office buildings, are allowed in employment center, but not industrial. So it just speaks to what their statements of intent were. This is another district that does have some specific uses related to whether, or the industrial does, whether you are adjacent to 301 or not. So it's another good example of how you can limit uses based on size of uses, I should say, based on location. And I'm looking specifically at like the top of page 2, where like distribution and centers and warehousing that don't exceed 75,000 square feet is allowable anywhere in those districts. But if you are on the 301 corridor, then there is no restriction on the building footprint. And you can see that the bulk standards are identical.
Any questions or comments for Carl? From task force?
Hey, this is Cindy Genther. I have 2 properties for sale on the 301 corridor. One is zoned industrial, the other is zoned employment center. It's very confusing to people who are looking at these properties as to what the differences are. And honestly, I think this consolidation is a very good idea for the property owners to have a consistent zoning district in the 301 corridor. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Is there anyone in the audience, in the public would like to comment?
Yeah, just what's the width of the 301 corridor? Is it a half a mile from 301 each side, the entire length of Kent County? Or is it 20 yards or?
Well, I think we have limited it to the properties in question, I believe, are all actually adjacent to the 301 right of way. And now they may extend almost a mile to the east. But so
Jim Smith.
So, yeah, if it's, I think we've always interpreted 301 corridor to basically mean that you've got to have a property line that is adjacent to the right of way.
Anyone else in the audience?
Just to clarify, Carla, is it the staff's recommendation that all of the uses and special exceptions that apply to both districts currently be also apply to the consolidated district?
Yes, it is. And that the name of the district would remain Employment Center.
No longer got industrial.
No longer industrial.
It's a PR job for our economic development people to make sure they didn't say we eliminated all the industrial.
And I guess that could probably be up to further debate, but that was staff's recommendation.
Right. Is there anyone in the public on the phone or online that has a comment or question? Thank you. All right. Sounds like we've got an idea where we're going. Thank you, Carla.
Thank you.
You should be a lawyer. You can, like Cindy, you can convince anyone anything. We're moving on to discussion of task force schedule.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last item is a proposed calendar and topics to review. The goal is to close out on the text change requests. We have, I think we have 5 remaining that were submitted at the end of the process. And we'd like to do that in May, go through those with you in our standard way, and then spend the rest of the year trying to wrap up the consultants' work and the different things that they're working on, and hold a 4th public forum in December. The proposed schedule looks at meeting every other month, and the dates are specifically designed so that this meeting does not occur on the same week that the Planning Commission meets. So we can't say the last Wednesday because it isn't always the last Wednesday. So, but because of the way the calendar works, November and December didn't work out that way with the last Wednesday. So we put the 2 months together and combined them for a mid-December meeting for a public forum. These are certainly we can discuss them if the dates aren't amenable. The schedule is definitely slowed down, but we still have a lot of staffing issues, and it's hard to do daily operations, but we want to try and continue this by focusing on consultants' work. We're one, trying to wrap that up, and two, that allows it's less staff time since it's more focused on the consultant, with the exception of the last text changes, which would be the next meeting.
Thank you. Any of this task force have questions for Bill or staff? Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
One, is there anywhere in here where we're going to be looking at the map? I don't see that.
Right, that's actually the next phase. This is just wrapping up the text phase. Yep.
Okay, just text.
Right.
And the other, personally, September 28th is not good for me.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone online from the task force have questions for Bill? Anyone in the public here have a question or comment about our schedule? Anyone online? Question or comment about our schedule, proposed schedule? Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Our last item is any general task force comments for the staff or for greater good?
Carl did a heck of a job tonight.
Thank you. Anyone from the task force online or phone have a question, have anything about a process? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you very much.
Aye.